I guess we'll get started. I hope everyone's had a chance to look at the maps on the back. Just to introduce ourselves, my name is Jamie. This is Greg. We're from Parks and Trails, New York. So just a little bit of background about our organization before I get into the bike study. We're a nonprofit group, so we've been around for about 30 years. We're an advocate for the state parks, for local parks, for parks of all sizes, and then also for a connected network of trails throughout the state. So that connecting the trails, that's kind of how we got into this work. Community planning for bike networks, basically because that's how you get people to recreation and the trails and to the destinations they want to go on a bike. So we were really excited in the fall. We were selected to do this project by the town of Orangetown. And funding for the project, this was competitive funding that the town went after from the Tappan Zee Bridge project, and they were awarded the funding. NIAC is also doing a bike study with the same funding source. So we're really happy to work with the town. We have Amanda here from the town, so we're really pleased to be working with them. We've also, I don't think I see her in the audience right now, we've had an intern working on this project named Angela Litz. So hopefully she'll be here at some point tonight because she's really done an instrumental part of the project, done tons of outreach, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So a little bit about the project. What is the Orangetown Bike Study? It's basically a community planning process, and the goal is to create a vision for the cycling network in Orangetown. And that vision, really, it's just a network of facilities, and then it's also policies, programs, and other kind of long-term things that the town can do to improve comfort and safety for people that want to bike in Orangetown. Goals for the project really though include a wide engagement, and we've tried to do that through multiple means that I'll talk about. But it's really to have the community create the vision. We're the consultant, we're helping you to do that, but it's not just us coming in and saying, here's what you should do, here. The other thing I should say is the goal is something that works for Orangetown residents, for Orangetown families. That's the primary kind of audience for the project. And then, a long-term vision is obviously what we're looking for. The town also specifically asked for different levels of facilities at different price points, and that could be phased over different timelines. So it's something that you actually want to create. It's not just a plan that you want to sit on the shelf. So a little bit of context for the project. I'm sure you've heard of this bridge that goes over the Hudson River and what they've done with it. The relevant piece here is that I believe coming this year there's going to be a shared use path over the Mario and Cuomo Bridge. And I know there's lots of cyclists that already come through Orangetown. There's probably going to be more because of that path, because it creates a loop route from New York City where you can go up one side of the river, cross over the bridge, and go back down. This is kind of a little thing of they call it the landing zone area. This is in South Nyack. The Esposito rail trail that runs parallel to the river will link up with that shared use path, and that comes down into Orangetown. So the other context that I wanted to mention was in 2015, Rockland County, the Rockland County Executive put out what they call it a Complete Streets Framework. It basically said that the county should consider all roadway users, including cyclists, when they build roads or design or maintain roads in Rockland County. All right, so a little bit I talked about the outreach. This is a big goal of the project, was to involve lots of different groups and people. So our main outreach components were a survey that we did. We did an interactive community feedback map, and I actually have that pulled up on the computer so I can show you that more after the presentation if you'd like. We also did stakeholder interviews. Through our intern, we did lots of outreach to businesses, coffee shops, bike shops, schools. We had a couple people, I think at least one person in this room who helped us with bike counts in September, which was a really good opportunity. September's National Bike Month, so we actually got to take advantage of that early in the project and do bike counts at multiple locations in both of the trails. The project team, Greg and myself, did multiple site visits, and we were actually just driving the roads, taking pictures, thinking about what could happen on a certain road, and kind of where to make connections. And we also use some social media to get some input.
Yes, it's like,
We did a little biking, Cole and Randy. So feedback, this is kind of the top level takeaways from the survey. Safety was a big issue. People basically said there aren't enough bike lanes here, and I don't feel safe when I ride on the roads. Other things we asked people was where you're trying to go when you bike. So top destinations were so hamlets within Orangetown, river villages, the rail trails, and then state parks, Rockland Lake, Connors Lake, New Jersey. There's lots of biking between New Jersey and Orangetown, obviously. We did hear from people about groups of cyclists and kind of what they mean to the town. So we don't deal with that concern as much in this part of the project because we're really just kind of picking roads and trying to figure out what to do with them. But that is something we're going to look at when we put out the final plan as far as some ideas from other places how you could kind of manage or mitigate those cycling groups. And then the other big one was just kids. Like I want to be able to bike with my kids to the park, to school, to whatever. That was kind of a constant refrain that we heard from the survey. So really this is a little of the methodology of how we got to these maps. The first step, and a lot of this was given to us by the town when we first started the project, was they listed out a bunch of roads and we looked at a map and we said, how do we create connectivity within Orangetown and two neighboring communities? And when you look at the map, it's actually pretty obvious what, the roads that you have to look at and you have to think about where to put facilities. There's east-west routes, there's north-south routes, there's a couple of rail trails that you need to connect to. So that's what that is right there. It's a network of roads that we think it's important to dig deeper in and to see what could happen on that road from a cycling perspective. When I talk about connectivity, we're talking about, again, villages, schools and parks are hugely important, and then the rail trails. You'll see the different colors here. So red we call the priority network. These are usually, your main thoroughfares where you're getting from point A to B. And then we had another network of, we call them neighborhood routes. So this was trying to think of ways to get from A to B. They're maybe not as direct, but they're more through residential neighborhoods and kind of lower stress bike routes. Places where you might already want to ride if you don't want to ride on a major road. So that's the attempt to kind of make those connections there. Again, this is the first step is getting this network, and then we're going to kind of test this network in the next step. So kicking the tires, a little biking pun. Basically what we did here is we tried to classify all those streets in that network I just showed you in terms of how much traffic they have, how wide they are, and the speed limit. And when we compared those characteristics, we got basically 4 different categories. Some roads that were high speed and high traffic volume, and they weren't very wide. It's going to be tough to do things on those roads because we don't have room to protect people, basically. So we put those in a not compatible category. Doesn't mean you can't do anything on those roads. It just means it's going to either take lots of work, or maybe not everyone is ever going to be able to bike on that road. And the other category below that is called shared lane eligible. These are usually narrower roads. They're still pretty low speeds. So you can do some stuff on them. You can do some pavement markings and you can do some signage. You just probably can't do a bike lane. You don't have room. Next to that is a category called compatible. So this is still a low-speed road where you have some room. So this is kind of what we want to see. We could probably do a bike lane there. And then the category above it is compatible with protection. So these are roads that are plenty wide, but you might have high speed or high volume on that road. So you're going to have to do more protection to make people feel safe. So we had our priority network. We turned it into a categorization of what kind of facility could we do on a certain road. And then finally, we basically went from that step to recommending facilities for certain roadways and corridors. Again, this is still not engineering level analysis. This is not like do a 5-foot lane here and then switch to a 6-foot lane and then at 300 feet do an intersection treatment. It's not that level of detail. It's like this is a roadway with this. It's this wide about, and it has this much traffic volume, so you can do a striped bike lane. And in general, we think of a striped bike lane as 4 feet for a one-way and a stripe of half a foot. It's that level of detail. There's still going to be work required to actually design the facility, but you have a pretty good idea of what kind of facility it's going to be. One request of the town, from the town to us when we started the project was that we look at roads of all jurisdictions. So there's town roads in there, there's county roads, and there's state roads. There's a mix. And that mix is good because it makes it a lot more plausible that you're actually going to implement the network because you have a lot more options. Some of the roads the town can just do on their own. Some they'll work with the state, some they'll work with the county. There's also different funding sources available for roads with different jurisdictions. So again, you'll see these, we've switched the neighborhood to, it's kind of a pink hatch. The idea is, you have your major direct routes, and whatever they may be, a bike lane or a shared lane, and then you have this neighborhood network that, when you think about it, it's not really just one street, it's a network where when you take them all together, you get some ways of getting through the town on low-stress routes. I should mention, you see a big red line in the middle there. That's obviously Veterans Memorial Drive. So that's a really important proposed facility. That would be either a multi-use path or a protected bike lane, a two-way protected bike lane. So that's a county road, and that's an important east-west link. You'll see in the eastern part of the town, the rail trails are still maintained as really important corridors because they're already there. And we tried to support them with some other north-south roadways. Next two maps here, these are just kind of zooms of, this is Pearl River. You'll see in Pearl River, we've recommended some striped bike lanes kind of in the downtown area. And then as you go out, you'll see more shared lanes and neighborhood bikeways. This is kind of Spark Hill up to Blauvelt here. So again, the rail trail is still a really important connection, but you have these neighborhood bikeways and shared lanes that are supporting that rail trail. We are recommending an extension of the rail trail. We'll talk about that in one of the slides toward the end of the presentation.
Just one question. Can
Sure.
you kind of, while you're at it, can you just explain what some of these are? Like,
Sure.
There's a bike lane versus a protected bike lane versus or whatever, just so we don't
Sure.
have to.
I'm going to hand it over. My colleague will.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're going to do that, don't worry.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
we're not
if you
gonna-
know later, that's fine, but
No, I think we're all pretty much ready.
Okay. So just this slide real quick before we move on. This is kind of, Jamie was mentioning earlier, the need for some east-west, north-south routes. And so this is kind of taking that map and highlighting where those proposed routes are. So it's kind of confusing to look at it, with all the other lines, but so we did our best to kind of call that out in this right here. So as you can see, as you move from all the way from the Palisades all the way up to Pearl River, you're going to experience a lot of different roadway types and therefore a lot of different treatment types. But you'll have some way to get from there to Pearl River, same from Pearl River to Blauvelt, and from the end of the rail trail all the way down to Piermont. So we did our best to highlight that, but we'll try moving forward to be a little bit more clear about that. So yeah, so to answer your question, I'm just going to go through some of this terminology very quickly. Many of you are probably familiar with you may have seen these things in New York City and in other places, but you don't necessarily know what they are. So the first is the cycle track, which is a protected bike lane, which is most suited for the streets that we talked about that have higher than 6,000 vehicles per day, speed limits faster than 30 miles per hour, and roadways that are wide enough, so more than 32 feet in width, and just travel lanes and then additional shoulder width. Because as you can see in this diagram right here, you need a substantial amount of roadway space to do this. But this offers the highest level of protection, and you can give cyclists that level of protection with these bollards, which can be removable in the wintertime for snow removal, or they can be more permanent, like a curb, and they can also narrow a road and make cars travel slower and give pedestrians more room to cross the street. As the example in Columbus shows, it's kind of a median that gives pedestrians a place to rest if they're crossing a busy street and they don't necessarily make it across the street in time. And oftentimes they involve some kind of green colored paint to highlight conflict areas, and where there's lots of driveways where cars are moving in and out through intersections. So I'll go through some of that intersection treatment in the next slide, or in a couple slides. So we mentioned Veterans Memorial Drive as kind of the ideal candidate for this type of treatment. And as it stands right now, it's about a 68-foot wide street. That's including the shoulders. So just keeping the travel lanes the same width at 12 feet each, so 2 in each direction, and moving the shoulders around a little bit, we have enough room for a 4-foot wide buffer, which is a foot wider than what would normally be recommended, to kind of ensure a higher level of safety and comfort for people that are biking along Veterans Memorial Drive, whether it's to Pearl River Middle School or to work or to the business park that's on it. And then a 10-foot wide cycle track, so 5 feet in each direction. So it's a pretty wide and protected facility, something that we recommend for this really wide street, but also an important link. Changes everything. So this is a buffered bike lane. So we mentioned in places where you may not have enough room for a two-way cycle track, but you still need some kind of protection. So we looked at this on Middletown Road, where you have pretty wide shoulders, but you also have a lot of driveways coming in and out. So these painted buffers provide some kind of protection. They're usually 3 foot or about 1.5 foot wide. You can have a 3-foot wide bike lane and still keep some of the parking and these driveway entrances and the sidewalk along the road. And as you can see, if you're riding along this, you have some separation from vehicles, which changes the experience a lot. And we think Middletown Road is definitely a suitable place for that.
Would it not be better to have the cars parked on the roadside?
Yeah, so that's an option too. So it depending on how much, what the engineering kind of plan comes out with, that's also an option. So to protect the lane with parked cars, that's good in places where there's going to be a lot of turnover with parking. So you have fewer cars moving in and out over the bike lane. So that might be a good idea on Middletown Road.
One problem I see there with just a 3-foot wide bike lane and cars parked, people can open their door and you can have them there.
Yeah, so the 3 foot is a minimum, but also you can make the buffer a little bit wider so that the cyclists have some room to go off into the buffer if they need to when a car is opening its door. And putting like someone mentioned, putting the cars on outside here, the parked cars, dooring oftentimes happens from the driver's side door, so the passenger side door is, not usually a big issue, but you can see here there's someone opening their door, and so the cyclist would at least be able to go out into the buffer if that's an option. On more constrained streets, but you still need some type of protection, you have these conventional striped bike lanes. So this is something that you're definitely all familiar with. You've seen it. We're not aware of any examples here in Orangetown of this, but Central Avenue, Pearl River is a good candidate for that. You could also there's actually ways to do it so you don't have to remove this diagonal parking. You can have the cars park in back in diagonal parking. And this is kind of an example. We just did a bike study in Troy where they rolled these out. These are wider than 3 feet, but you can see there's still a lot of roadway space, and it gives cyclists some kind of protection. These striped lanes, these striped lines are usually 1.5 foot wide, so there is some kind of stripe protection. Sorry, a 1/2 foot wide. Shared roadways. So these are most roads in Orangetown aren't wide enough for bike lanes or protected bike lanes. But they are important in terms of connectivity. So one of the things that we recommended are these shared lanes. So these shared lane markings, they don't require a specific amount of roadway space, and they usually go kind of in a part of the roadway where bicyclists should be riding, so out of the door zone, and definitely enough room so they're not on the yellow line. And they can be kind of enhanced with these lines, these white lines here, to kind of make it look like it's a bike lane, to kind of give some additional aid. But one of the benefits of these is not only are they easy to implement, they're, if they don't work, it doesn't require tearing up the road and doing something else. You can kind of reposition them, you can put green paint around them. So most roads, because they're too narrow for a bike lane, but they see traffic volume low enough, I think our plan recommends roads that are 32 feet or narrower and have less than 6,000 vehicles per day, speed limits at 30, but less than 35, they can accommodate share roads.
Does the, it's, I cycle on the roads a lot, very few of them are marked up here, but, something like that, what is it, does it actually have any effect on the safety of cyclists?
So it has a minimal effect on the safety of cyclists, but what it does is it gives cyclists some kind of direction, and it makes drivers aware that there are potentially cyclists in the road. The fact of the matter is that a lot of the roads in the town aren't wide enough as they are to accommodate bike lanes. So you either would have to widen the road or do some kind of reconfiguration to accommodate, a bike lane or a protected bike lane. So this is kind of the speed limits are low enough on many roads, the posted speed limits, where this could, most cyclists may not feel comfortable with this, but the cyclists who are utilitarian cyclists and the more experienced cyclists who just want some kind of, awareness that they're in the road or that they might be in the road, this would be something that would benefit them.
And, are things like that linked to any kind of like enforceable traffic violation if a vehicle is doing?
Well, cyclists are, in New York State, cyclists are allowed to ride, they're allowed to take the lane. And so this is just reinforcing that. And then there's usually signage that goes along with it that says cyclists in road or cyclists may use full lane. And you can use green colored paint that kind of makes it more visible. The green color to kind of engineering and planning people is kind of, it indicates a conflict zone. So if there's mixing between vehicles and bicyclists, and it's a bright color. So it's not ideal, which is why it's part of the overall network. And
what I don't like about that side is drivers will think, well, if you're on a road that doesn't have that, it doesn't have a bike lane, you don't belong there.
right, and that's an
So
education.
that was scary.
Well, that's an education thing. So we'll talk. The final plan, we're gonna deal a lot more with education and ways to kind of improve communication between the bicycling community and people who don't bicycle, and give that oftentimes the way to bridge that with these is that signage that says bicyclists may use full lane or bicyclists in the lane. And it's I want to reinforce that this is just part of a network, and that there are, we'll kind of, in the next couple slides I'll talk about these bike boulevards and how they can kind of serve as a gap between these shared lane markings and the more protected infrastructure. But we're working with the constraints of the roadway widths that are out there right now, and oftentimes the traffic volumes on these roads are such that you can't take a lane really and if you can't turn this into a one-way street without doing some kind of additional study to find out how you can accommodate the traffic somewhere else. So this is kind of a temporary thing, or some kind of connection. I know it's not the best, it doesn't make me feel.
I'm not clear on it. Are you saying that a bicyclist can be in the middle of the lane? You don't have to.
In New York State, yet bicyclists are allowed to ride, they're considered traffic, so they're expected to follow all the rules of the road, including stopping and stop signs and things, but they can also take the full lane. So they can, I'm not sure what the specific language is, but they're supposed to ride, as far to the right as safely as possible. Which, if there's parked cars here and this door is going to open, we need to accommodate, room for that, for this share. So quickly, improved shoulders, so also in some of the streets that we deemed not compatible, whether because they were, the roadway width was too narrow, the traffic speeds were too high, or the road volume was too high for shared lane markings. Some of these streets we looked at again, and we saw that there are relatively wide shoulders, and so putting either, rumble strips that wouldn't impact bicyclists. So like, rumble strips that are spaced like here, but there's a big gap here and here, and doing a painted shoulder is something you can do, or just putting a bike lane symbol here. So in the plan, we'll kind of give more examples of how you can do these improved shoulders. But these are also another way that, a lot of the roads in the town are too narrow, or too many cars on them to do shared lane markings or bike lanes. So this might be a good way to balance some of that. So neighborhood bikeways are a whole second component of the network. So these are a lot of the roads that we mentioned earlier. No matter what you do to those roads, some people still aren't going to feel safe riding on those roads themselves or with their family. And so these neighborhood bikeways kind of connect the major bikeways to parks, schools, neighborhoods, activity centers. And these are usually on residential streets with traffic volumes of less than 3,000 vehicles per day. So you might not know what that threshold means, but that's a pretty low traffic street. And they're usually, they have speed limits of 30 miles per hour or less, and they're usually wide enough that you could put in shared lane markings and some signage, some wayfinding signage, and they're usually, like I said before, they're usually in school zones or around neighborhood parks, and so these are places that most cyclists would feel comfortable, and most people currently ride with their families, if they're riding in their neighborhood and they're not really venturing out onto those main roads yet. This is kind of making some enhancements to those roads. So I'll just go through quickly some of those possible enhancements. So there's two things you can do if the roadway volume is 3,000 vehicles or less, the traffic speeds are 30 miles per hour or less, you don't really need to do a lot of engineering. So these things might not apply. But if there is a road where speeding is a known problem, or a lot of people are using the road as a cut through, there are some things you can do to kind of slow cars down with speed humps, or you can bump out the crosswalk right here so it narrows the road and narrows the sight line so people are going to slow down when they're passing through, and also improves pedestrian access for people crossing the street here. And for on-street parking, so either marking a line so that people know that they can park on the street there, that also narrows the road width. And if there are a lot of people cutting through on the street, you can do these, you can limit access points to the street, so local traffic can get through, but through these median diverters, vehicles coming off this street can only turn right, vehicles can only turn right here, but bicyclists can get through the street through here. So this is obviously something, if you're going to control traffic volume, you have to make sure that you know how it's going to impact other roads nearby. But this is kind of a solution for streets where we didn't really encounter very many streets where traffic volumes were more than 3,000 vehicles per day, but we do have some streets where they're approaching 3,000 vehicles per day. So this might be something to consider for that. At intersections, the intersections are usually the most conflict-prone parts of the bikeway network. There's different things you can do that are different striping. So these are wide striping treatments. So the bike lane comes through here, and people can see that there's some kind of bike lane crossing through here. Continuing the bike lane with these shared lane markings. So the primary purpose of these is to give cyclists direction through the intersection, and also to let drivers know that there are cyclists coming through this intersection, which you may think is like a no-brainer, but a lot of times people are making a turn and they may not consider cyclists when they're making that turn. This is just a standard striped bike lane coming through here. This is a left turn box, so in places where a lot of cyclists are going to be making left turns, Cyclists coming through here will come out and they'll be able to get in front of the traffic that's stopped right here. And they'll be able to safely make a left turn. This is an advanced stop bar, so in places that are relatively low traffic volumes, this is where cars would stop right here. Well, actually, back here, this is the crosswalk. Cyclists can get up here, so that way they can kind of see out here for cars coming this way. And this is, like I mentioned before, some brightly colored pavement paint. Green is the color that we recommend using. That was strange. So this is just a green. This is supposed to be green, but this is an enhanced shared lane marking I was talking about before. How you can paint them with green around them to kind of make them even more visible. It's kind of more like that. This is what we did in Troy at a previous project. We did this on one of the neighborhood bikeways. These are advisory bike lanes, so these are in places where there may not be a center line painted on the road, but these are kind of these aren't bike lanes. Cars can go in and out of them, cars can park in them, but at least it gives cars an awareness that there's cyclists there, and actually makes people feel a little bit safer knowing that they have a dedicated space in the roadway. And then this is kind of just painting an entire stripe down the middle of the road with kind of what we do with the bike lane. It's important to have signage on any of these bikeways because this is how people can navigate the network. So this is an example we did in Troy. This is the kind of NACDO, which is a transportation group that kind of recommends these treatments. A lot of the signage in New York City and the treatments in New York City are based on these standards. But it gives cyclists direction to important destinations in both distance and time, so this is cycling time. And you can highlight important, if there's a bike shop, you can highlight that. And these can also be useful for pedestrians and drivers as well, but they're usually scaled for bicycles and they're usually near bike lanes or near major turns. And these are on bike boulevards, so these neighborhood bikeways. So changing the street sign so people know that it's part of this bikeway network. This is a nice thing to do for the town can kind of promote the network that way, and cyclists can navigate the network a lot easier. As Jamie mentioned, and he'll take it from here, but some opportunities for expanding the existing multi-use trail network.
Do you have a quick question?
Quick question on that last slide. Have you figured out how to get this information up to Google Maps so that, because Google Maps in some areas is very good at plotting bike routes, like Boulder, they've got it nailed. But other places, they don't have route people out. Have you had any connections with?
We have, what we've primarily been doing is trying to get multi-use trails on Google Maps. There's a lot of sections of multi-use trails that are missing, but oftentimes Google will have like a dotted green line that says it's a bicycle-friendly street, when that doesn't really mean anything, especially for people that don't feel comfortable riding in traffic. So I think we haven't really done that yet, and I think that's going to be more and more of an issue moving forward, with making sure that there's some kind of standard.
It would be great if this eventually made its way up.
Yeah, but you want to make sure that the treatment that we're recommending is actually on the road, or there's some kind of treatment on the road that you're putting people on that road.
And then you worry about the
Right.
So I'll just quickly go through, the trail system, the existing trail system is great. We had a couple ideas to improve it, just to make the entire network better. So sorry that got cut up on the top. The first was, we looked at the Clarke Rail Trail that currently terminates at the Blauvelt Library. And we saw there's what we see on the map is a mile of town-owned property that's zoned parkland now. And that's just a continuation of the rail corridor there. So we think the town should look into converting that to a trail. We know that the current trail is, I think 2013 was the last extension. So that's just something that we saw. We want to talk to the town more about looking at it more. The point there is that's more trail mileage. It also gets you farther out into the network, the roadway network that we're proposing. Second one was, so the hill on the rail trail between Spark Hill and Piermont, we think should be resurfaced, improved, repaved, however you want to improve it to make it basically more accessible, more safe, and more comfortable for people to use. The point here is that there's actually there's limited options, on-road options. We don't have width in any of the roads that connect Spark Hill and Piermont to do a protected bike lane. So our idea is to try to improve the trail that currently exists, at least in that section. We know there's been discussion and some controversy over other parts of the rail trail. We think this one there's a case for it just on safety and connectivity. Another really, frankly, is kind of a dangerous intersection now is in Spark Hill. It's Highland, Maine. It's where the trail crosses right near that landscaping business or whatever, where cyclists, when they go to the street, they can't see the lights and they don't have a signal now. So it's actually it's a quite dangerous section that it could be pretty simply, I mean, there could be a signal there, like you have a pedestrian signal for cyclists there. There's other ways to do it. There's pavement intersection markings that you can do. That's a key intersection that we think should be improved. The third idea is probably a longer term thing. This is, I should probably go to the map here, but so this is basically Cloudville Mountain Road, hooks in with Old Mountain Road, I think, then, which is a downhill toward 9W. So these are steep hills on both sides, but it's really the only access to that whole river corridor on the northern side of Orangetown. So for experienced cyclists, providing some shared lane markings on those roads and then doing some kind of crossing treatment. This is called a hawk beacon, or it's a pedestrian hybrid beacon, they call it. Basically, you push a button and you eventually get a light where you can cross. If you could cross 9W there, you could go, there's a Broadway that goes right to an entrance to the rail trail there. Something that should be looked into further. Obviously, that's going to take different, some work to get that done, but it's something to look into. This is between Spark Hill and Orangeburg. This is State Route 340, East Orangeburg Road. So this, again, it's a pretty narrow roadway. This is a relatively new sidewalk, but this is a really important corridor because there's all these schools right there, and it's also a pretty important connection between two kind of business districts in Orangetown. So we think that we should look into doing some kind of off-road side path there. Another thing that might, in the short term, be a good idea is looking into some kind of connections to the rail trail on the backs of some of those properties there. Universities might build short little spurs to the rail trail to give students access to the rail trail there. That might be a short-term kind of a patch. I should note we've been talking to people tonight about the other side of the J.B. Clarke Rail Trail going down into New Jersey, so I think there's some talk of projects to try to connect that, and that would be another great connection on the rail trail. Sure. Okay. Yeah, so we have the other one on the map now, but we will look into the other one. I know there's going to be more coming out of some people that we've talked to tonight about whether that's a possibility.
So,
Sorry.
where did we land on were you in favor of leaving the northern end of the Esposito Trail in its current state?
Well, so
Travel?
we're going to punt, honestly, because there's a NIAC study that we think is probably better equipped to deal with that section of the trail. I mean, we could go out and tell you, we think in general a paved trail is usually easier to maintain, more comfortable, and more people will ride on it. When we did the counts in September, we counted the Clarke Rail Trail versus the Esposito Trail, and we had 100,000 uses, estimated annual uses on the Clarke Trail, and only 70,000 on the Esposito Trail at Piermont at the station there. So more people would probably use the trail if it were paved. But the section we're specifically talking about, the reason we want it paved is really because of that connectivity thing between Spark Hill and Piermont. I think it'd be safe.
In the hill, I mean, the hill, there's a lot of erosion, and just having that hill be paved would be a much safer.
Yeah.
So we run down.
There's been historically a lot of pushback about paving some of these trails.
Right.
I mean, all across the state, we're a statewide organization, we're working with communities that are kind of grappling with the same things. They have these trails that are either stone dust, or they want to build a new trail, and they're trying to decide between paving it or having a paved trail, and weighing the pros and cons. And usually, if they're looking to increase accessibility to the trail, making it safer, and for people that are pushing strollers and wheelchairs, and also making it a place where people can ride all types of bikes. Paving it is usually a better option, but in a lot of cases, you have a lot of people using it for running, for walking, and you kind of have to weigh whether or not you want to, which audience you're trying to accommodate more here. And in an ideal world, you'd be able to pave the current width and then add a side path that's either stone dust or gravel. But unfortunately, like the roads in Orangetown, this is kind of a narrow right of way, and you don't have that opportunity.
So this is kind of looking forward to the final plan. So I mentioned before, we got a lot of input on the survey on lots of different things. One of them was this, issues people have with groups of cyclists that are coming through Orangetown. So that's one of the things that we're going to try to address in some way. It's not the focus of the project really, but we realize it's an issue, so we should at least try to find other places that might have dealt with it or get some best practices. So that's one of the things that will be in the final plan. Other things that we'll deal with are bike parking and how you maintain facilities, how you evaluate the network going forward. I mentioned we did counts. So you should do counts every year, basically. That's a good way to measure how you're doing with the network. Are there more cyclists on the road at a spot after you put in a facility? So that's one of the things we'll recommend going forward. We have 2 electronic counters measuring the trails right now. And the town specifically asked us for recommendations for how to use those types of things going forward. So that'll be in the final plan. Also events, programming, how do you get more people knowledgeable about the network or interested in cycling, or another thing is there's lots of bike clubs, and then there's the town, and how do you bring these 2 groups together? Maybe better coordination or connection could help deal with some of the issues people have with groups cycling through town that they don't think are paying attention to rules, things like that. And then other things that will give the town are kind of tools in terms of decision matrix. How do you pick a facility for a road based on the kind of characteristics that we were talking about? What things cost? We have funding estimates, and then we'll do an implementation table that lays out the kind of projects you should do in 5 years versus those you should do in 10, and why. So that's kind of what's coming in the final plan. And then this is just the project. We started with this big community engagement phase. Now we've done the kind of laying out the network phase. The next phase really is taking feedback on the things that we've put out there, and then also doing this prioritization of routes and facilities, other policies and recommendations. And then I guess the fun part for us is to do this in the spring, hopefully with better weather in May. We'll do a pop-up demonstration where we actually go out and we use temporary paint. We do some of these facilities on the road. Hopefully we could involve a local bike club or a local school, maybe to do a bike lane to a school or to a local park. So if you have ideas, or we had really great participation in the count. We love to have people out there with us, either helping us paint or getting some clubs involved in this thing. It's really a great way to get people out to understand what you're actually talking about when you talk about these facilities. Is you just paint them on the road in temporary paint, put out cones or bollards or whatever, and have people actually ride through and tell you how it feels. Was that the kind of thing that you think could work here? So that will be something that's happening in May. And then kind of the final piece is our presentation of the final plan with the town board. So I should also mention we're asking for engagement again and feedback. So we have boards for comments. We have a map here you can mark right on the map with the Post-its. And then online, we have a comment form over here actually too. You can write whatever you want on that, and we'll take it tonight. We have the same type of comment form on the project page on the Orangetown website. It's orangetown.com/bike study. And then the final thing is we have this Picasso-looking map where, so this used to be very nice looking, and we just ruined it by putting all of our proposed network on it. But all those little icons are people that just wanted to put comments on the map. You can pretty much put any kind of comment on there you want. You can use it on your cell phone, you can use it on a computer. You just drop a pin on the map and then you call it a safety issue or a road issue or parking or whatever, and you can write your comment. Other people can respond or can comment as well. So anyway, we have all these things, these ways for you to give us feedback, and we really do take them into account, and we need them actually, because as you can see, there's lots of things on this map right now. We want to know which one's the most important, which ones will work, what needs to be changed.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe shared lane markings, we just leave them out and we don't consider that as a treatment option if that's something that people overwhelmingly feel like that's not going to improve the situation. So we definitely want to hear your feedback on what we can do to make it worthwhile.
So our plan was to stick around and talk to people individually, but we can also answer a couple more questions or discuss as a group.
Just one, I can make this a comment right to you as much as you want, but maybe, I think a really important question is the barrier between the west side and east side of town is the Hackensack River and the reservoir. So I think it's 3 bridges that go across, and all of them are terrible. So I guess rather than me suggesting which one I like, I was wondering, what if you had to just do one? And I would, doing one in Orangetown would be fabulous. But where is there an opportunity to make a safe way to get across even one of those bridges? And what's your recommendation?
So what we have Convent.
Yeah, Convent, Blauvelt, and Memorial Highway, or Veterans.
Yeah. So from what we have on the map now, we're trying to propose an actual protected facility on Vets Drive. So that's the one where we propose to do, to actually put real infrastructure down and to do something big. The other two, what we're proposing now, are shared lane markings, which they're dictated mostly by those other roads being pretty narrow, Convent and Blauvelt. So, and I assume that the bridges, they're probably even narrower.
Oh, they're terrible, but with their lower volume,
Yeah.
the problem with, and I don't want to take all night, but I think everybody in the room knows this, it's a high volume road. That's not a 30-mile-an-hour limit like everywhere else, it's 45.
We're talking about veterans more.
Veterans.
Yeah.
So what would be proposed there? I'd love to see what would be
So
proposed.
let me just, we go back. So for veterans, the only way you can do it, you have to kind of go all in if you're going to do something there because of that high speed. So basically, you need a 4-foot buffer, or 3-foot minimum, but 4-foot buffer with some kind of actual physical separation.
Right, for the road, but
Yeah.
the bridge, the road, you can always go on Old Orangeburg Road if
Okay.
you had to, and it wouldn't cost a nickel. I mean, nobody drives on it, it's basically a bicycle lane.
Right.
So this is fine, if that gets done, great, but the bridge, what about,
Yeah.
the bridge is a problem.
I don't have an answer for you now. It's something we'd have to look into further, and we'll definitely note it. And
I mean, without, the final comment is, without that bridge doing, why bother to put all the expense to do this very nice path along?
right, and that is something when you engineer a facility like that, that has to be that is a component.
Thank you.
So thanks.
I mean, I feel like, backing away from here, like, it almost feels like this is an approach to cycling that sort of sees cycling like driving, in that it's an instrument to get to a specific destination. And I think it goes to the discussion before about paving or stone dust, and I feel like there's a value to a sensitivity or an intimacy of certain levels of bicycle and walking infrastructure that aren't necessarily benefited qualitatively by being paved. And so I just wonder if, I understand access is the major focus now, and then safety, of course, is next to access. But whether there's actual qualitative sensitivity that sort of comes next in terms of deciding whether everything should just be paved and well lit and completely safe, but that might shortchange some of the qualitative end condition.
I also think though, we do think of this in a utilitarian sense as far as like, if someone wants to go from here to there, we need a safe way for them to get there. And so that is the kind of the top level thinking, but I think when you talk more about the qualitative stuff, the question also is, does that trail exist around here? And so, I mean, when you look at like, I think there are other trails around here that give you that kind of feeling. So I think that's why we're probably okay with saying, let's be direct and safe on this trail here where we need it. Because we know you have those other places. This Tallman Mountain has it's a multi-use kind of more of a natural kind of multi-use trail. And there's lots of state parks and things where you can get that. So hopefully you can have both, I guess.
Is there any thoughts of making this county-wide, or even talking to Bergen County? Well, I myself ride a lot, and Orangetown's pretty small,
Yeah.
and a lot of the issues might even be helped by including Clarkstown and
Yeah.
Bergen County.
So we definitely, like, we've looked at Clarkstown's comprehensive plan and seen they have proposed connections to Orangetown. Most of them we've hit in some way or another. There's a couple that we don't think are suitable roads. So I think we're pretty good going up there. We had less, frankly, conversation with New Jersey so far about what they're doing, but that is a place we do need to go. So as far as countywide, they have this kind of law on the books, and so I think they want to move forward. But this is probably
The scope of our project is the town. of
yeah, Orangetown's our focus. But once you do it here, like my X project is next, so you kind of set the bar here with kind of facilities, the expectation of signage whenever you do a facility. That's a big deal. So I think if you do it here, the county will see it, and I'm sure they'll. There is also a means for the town to influence what the county does through this. They call it a Complete Streets Work Group that I think they meet every other month or something like that. So there is that possibility. It's going to take work for those to do it.
It's kind of a long shot, but the Rockland County Master Plan actually called for bike lane along Palisades Parkway.
Yeah.
I don't know if have anybody ever programmed that or looked into it?
Well, we're not.
That could be a long, like we can have a long-term goal of having some kind of protected bikeway along the Palisades Parkway, but we wouldn't want to make it a focus, I guess, of this.
Also, the jurisdiction, is that a NISDOT road?
I don't know, I think.
Palisades Park Commission.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure though. It's probably not.
That was actually the answer to that in Washington.
Yeah.
That was the kind of compromise, so that there wasn't a trail on the parkway, but it could form as part of that.
How about even a bicycle Sunday?
I mean, that's a programming idea that we can definitely.
That's like a car-free day on the parkway, yeah.
Just give us one lane.
Well, like, I know in Pier, there was a comment that was put in about the pier in Piermont, about they should do that either one day a week or one day a summer or something like that. So that's
Someone
it.
said the Tappan Zee used to have that.
Those are cool ideas that we would definitely love to highlight some of those. If people wanted to put those forward, that'd be great.
So you had a slide there on 340,
Yeah,
and I ride that road quite a bit, but I think the real danger point is when 340 comes into 303,
right.
you have to ride on 303 to then get on, I think it's Greenberg Road.
Bush, yeah.
Greenbush, and then you come out again on 340. You can come out 3 different times as you go up the Bradley Road.
Yeah, so we kind of designed a route where you'd have to do some kind of safe crossing of 303, get on to Greenbush, I think, and we had kind of a detour around that area. It's just what we could find. You would need, but you definitely need intersection treatment or a dedicated signal or something to get people across 303.
Well, you don't have to cross 303. If you're going north, you can stay on the same side as 303. You have to ride 303.
Right.
And
We're not recommending that in our plan because we just kind of stayed away from 303 in general as a high-speed, congested roadway.
But that's the only way you can get to a fairly good riding road, Green Bush Road.
No, you can't, no, they're putting in the trail, you can have the two parts of people.
That's further north.
Yeah,
It's part of the south part. So there's kind of two pinch points.
Right.
You want to go to, first you can just go to East Highway.
Well, here, look at the map and tell us if the route we're suggesting is totally ridiculous.
Yeah,
We'll-
you can mark it up.
Yeah,
before
we'll
you
change
leave,
it.
and we'll-
The 50s, you mentioned Tappan's Bridge, my understanding is that the new bridge is getting a multi-use path on it.
Yes,
Actually, there's some discussion whether it should be open 24 hours or not, and
Yeah.
things like that, but it's definitely, so hooking up to that, again, and that's Signage, so.
yeah, I
Not
mean,
you guys, but
It'll
there should be a
impact-
key point of making sure that that connection is.
right, you know, obviously the big issue is we can get you down here or we can get you up here, but it's really hard going this way up, like Old Mountain Road and Cloudsley Mountain Road. So our big challenge then is really getting from Sparkill to Piermont. And so we have a couple roads where they're very narrow, where we're proposing like shared lane markings, because that's all we can do, and then it's the rail trail.
Well, talking about the club trail, that would be ideal, because we're actually doing the Northern Valley Greenway that's going to come through Bergen County and hook up to the bottom of the club trail. But
Okay,
it would be nice if we could continue that all the way to the Tappan Bridge.
right. Yeah, I think the missing connection is still this, it's whatever we do between Sparkill and Piermont is really important there, So thank you for coming. We'll stick around and talk to people. And honestly, this map is no good to us unless it has your comments on it. Same thing with those sheets. So please let us know what you think.